porch swing creaked under Eleanor Harper's weight, a slow, mournful rhythm that matched the pulse of Willow Creek's quiet evening. Her fingers traced the heart carved into the armrest, its edges worn smooth by years of touch. Henry had etched it with his pocket knife one summer night, 30 years ago, when the colonial house on Maple Lane was still new, its white clapboards gleaming under Vermont's endless sky. "So you'll always know I'm here," he'd said, his grin as bright as the lilacs blooming by the garden gate. Now, the lilacs were in full bloom again, their purple clusters swaying in the breeze. But Henry was gone. 3 years since his heart attack stole him away, leaving Eleanor to haunt their home alone, a ghost in her own life. The air was heavy tonight, thick with the promise of a storm. Clouds churned over the green mountains, their edges lit by a fading sun. Eleanor's gray hair, once a rich auburn, fell loose around her shoulders, catching the wind. She closed her eyes, letting the swing's motion carry her back to better days. Henry's laughter, Nathan's small hands tugging at her apron, the scent of maple scones baking in the oven. But the memory soured as reality crept in. Nathan, her only son, hadn't stepped foot in Willow Creek in years, not since Henry's funeral, when he'd stood by the grave, eyes distant, promising to call. He never did. The house was too quiet now, its creaking floorboards a cruel reminder of absence. Eleanor opened her eyes, her gaze falling on the lilac bush by the garden. She and Henry had planted it their first spring here, their hands caked with soil, their laughter mingling with the hum of bees. It was her pride, her proof of love's endurance, blooming faithfully each May. But even the lilacs couldn't fill the void. Nathan was in Burlington, an hour's drive away, living a life that didn't include her. She'd sent him maple scones last Christmas, packed in a tin with a handwritten note. "Thinking of you and Liam, love, Mom." No reply, not even a text. The silence was a wound that festered, deeper than Henry's loss. Eleanor's hand stilled on the heart carving. Her chest tightened, a familiar ache that wasn't just grief but something sharper. Betrayal. She'd raised Nathan alone after Henry's death, scrimping to pay for his college, mailing care packages when he moved to Burlington. She'd been his anchor, his constant, and now she was a forgotten name in his inbox, a mother reduced to a memory he didn't bother to revisit. The wind picked up, rattling the porch's wind chimes, their notes sharp and discordant. Eleanor shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter. She should go inside, light the fireplace, pretend the emptiness didn't gnaw at her. But then her phone buzzed in her pocket, a sound so rare it startled her. She fumbled for it, her arthritis flaring as she swiped the screen. An email from Nathan. The subject line was blank, but his name alone sent her heart racing. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the message. What could he want after all this time? A belated thank you for the scones? An apology for his silence? Or, her stomach twisted, bad news? She opened it, the screen's glow casting shadows across her face. "Mom, things are a bit rough right now. Claire got reassigned at work and my contract job just ended. Liam's got school activities and we're juggling a lot. If you're up for a change of scenery, maybe you could come stay with us for a while. Help each other out. Let me know." Eleanor read it again, then a third time, each word a spark in the dark. Nathan was reaching out. Her boy, the one who'd once clung to her skirts, who'd begged for one more bedtime story, wanted her in his life again. The invitation was cautious, almost formal, but it was there. A crack in the wall between them. She pictured Liam, her grandson, his freckled face lit by a smile. She hadn't seen him in person since he was 6, when he'd called her Gram Ellie and hugged her tight. Maybe this was her chance to rebuild, to be needed again. But doubt crept in, cold as the storm clouds gathering overhead. Why now? Why after years of silence? Was this a genuine plea or something else? She stood, the swing groaning as she stepped onto the porch. The lilac bush caught her eye, its blooms trembling in the wind. She walked to it, her slippers soft against the grass, and touched a cluster of flowers. The scent was sweet, grounding, a reminder of Henry's promise. "We'll grow old here, Ellie, you and me." But Henry was gone, and Nathan had built a life without her. She'd spent 3 years tending this house, these lilacs, waiting for a sign that someone still cared. Now, Nathan's email was that sign, or a trap. Her fingers tightened around a lilac stem, the petals bruising under her grip. She couldn't stay here, trapped in memories, while her son dangled hope from a distance. Inside, the house was a museum of her past. The living room's oak floors creaked underfoot, the mantel lined with photos. Henry and Eleanor at their wedding, Nathan's gap-toothed grin at his 5th birthday, the 3 of them at Willow Creek's Maple Festival, syrup dripping from their chins. She paused at a framed picture of Nathan at his college graduation, his arm around her, his smile wide but fleeting. That was the last time he'd looked at her like she mattered. After Henry's death, Nathan had pulled away, his calls growing shorter, his visits non-existent. She told herself he was busy, new job, new wife, new son. But the truth was uglier. He'd moved on, leaving her behind. Eleanor sank into the armchair by the fireplace, the phone still clutched in her hand. She scrolled through her inbox, searching for traces of Nathan. There were her emails to him, recipes, updates about the lilacs, a photo of the scones she'd baked. All unanswered. She stopped at one she'd sent after Henry's funeral. "Nathan, I know you're hurting. I'm here if you need me. Love, Mom." No reply. The memory of that day flooded back. Nathan standing by the casket, his jaw tight, Claire whispering to him, their quick departure after the service. Eleanor had driven home alone, the house's silence deafening. She'd waited for him to call, to grieve together. He never did. The storm was closer now, thunder rumbling in the distance. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the lilac bush outside the window, its branches swaying wildly. She remembered planting it with Henry, their fingers entwined in the soil, their dreams rooted in this land. She'd nurtured it through harsh winters, just as she'd nurtured Nathan through his childhood. But nurturing wasn't enough anymore. Nathan's email wasn't just an invitation. It was a challenge. Did she dare uproot her life for a chance at reconnection, knowing he might let her down again? The thought terrified her, but so did the alternative. Staying here, alone, watching the lilacs bloom and wither, year. She stood and walked to the kitchen where a tin of maple scones sat on the counter, untouched since she'd baked them last week. She'd planned to mail them to Nathan, a silent plea for acknowledgement. Now they felt like relics of her desperation. She opened the tin, the sweet buttery scent filling the air, and broke a scone in half. It crumbled in her fingers, just like her hope had crumbled. With each unanswered message, she tossed the pieces into the sink, her hands trembling. Enough. She wasn't a beggar, scraping for her son's affection. If Nathan wanted her in his life, she'd go, but on her terms. The phone buzzed again, a weather alert warning of the approaching storm. Eleanor ignored it and reread Nathan's email. Help each other out. The phrase gnawed at her. What did he mean? Was he asking for her time, her presence, or something more? She thought of Liam, his bright eyes, his laughter. Maybe he needed her, even if Nathan didn't. The idea warmed her, a flicker of purpose in the dark. But doubt lingered. Nathan's silence after Henry's death, his absence at Christmas, his failure to even acknowledge her scones, those weren't accidents. They were choices. And yet, here he was, offering a lifeline, or a leash. Eleanor paced the living room, the floorboards groaning under her steps. She stopped at the mantel, picking up a photo of Henry. His eyes, warm and steady, seemed to watch her. "What would you do, Henry?" she whispered. He'd always been the dreamer, the one who believed in second chances. He'd tell her to go, to fight for Nathan, to hold on to family. But Henry wasn't here, and Eleanor was tired of fighting alone. She set the photo down and walked to the window, where the lilacs were now battered by the wind. A petal tore free, spiraling into the dusk. She felt like that petal, fragile, adrift, but still holding its shape. The storm broke then, rain lashing the windows, thunder shaking the house. Eleanor's heart pounded, not from fear but from clarity. She couldn't stay in this mausoleum of memories, waiting for Nathan to remember she existed. His email was a door, cracked open just enough to tempt her. She'd walk through it, but not blindly. She'd sell the house, leave Willow Creek and go to Burlington, not because Nathan deserved it, but because she deserved a chance to be more than a widow, more than a forgotten mother. She deserved to be seen. She grabbed her phone and searched for a realtor, her fingers steady despite the storm's roar. The first name that appeared was Susan Caldwell, a local agent known for quick sales. Eleanor dialed the number, her pulse racing. The line rang twice before Susan answered, her voice warm but professional. "Caldwell Realty, how can I help you?" "This is Eleanor Harper," she said, her voice firm. "I want to sell my house on Maple Lane, the colonial with the lilac bush out front. Can you meet me tomorrow?" Susan hesitated, the rain audible through the phone. "That's a beautiful property, Mrs. Harper. Are you sure? The market's slow right now and—" "I'm sure," Eleanor cut in. "I need to move on." The words felt like a vow, binding her to a future she couldn't yet see. They set a time for the morning, and Eleanor hung up. She walked to the garden, rain soaking her cardigan, and clipped a single lilac bloom. The petals were wet, their scent faint but stubborn. "You're coming with me," she whispered, wrapping the stem in a damp napkin. She stood there, rain streaming down her face, thunder rolling like a warning. The house loomed behind her, its windows dark, its heart carved into a swing she'd never sit on again. Nathan's email was a gamble, a fragile thread of hope, but Eleanor was done waiting. She'd go to Burlington, face whatever awaited, and find out if her son still knew how to love her, or if she'd have to learn to love herself first. The lilac bloom trembled in her hand, a small defiant piece of her past. She tucked it into her pocket and turned toward the house, the storm raging around her. Tomorrow, she'd start over. Tonight, she'd let the rain wash away the weight of 3 lonely years. The Burlington airport was a blur of fluorescent lights and hurried footsteps, the air sharp with the scent of coffee and jet fuel. Eleanor Harper stood by the baggage claim, her suitcase at her feet, her eyes scanning the crowd for Nathan. Her fingers tightened around the damp napkin in her pocket, cradling the lilac bloom she'd clipped from the Willow Creek garden. The petals were bruised from the journey, their scent faint, like a memory struggling to breathe. She'd pictured this moment for days. Nathan's smile, Liam's freckled face, a hug to bridge the years of silence, but the crowd thinned and Nathan wasn't there. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Last-minute meeting, grab a cab, code for the door is 4729N. Eleanor's heart sank, the lilac's weight suddenly heavier. She'd sold her home, left Henry's legacy for this. A text, cold as the Vermont winter creeping in outside. The cab ride to Nathan's rental was a haze of gray streets and honking horns, Burlington's urban pulse a stark contrast to Willow Creek's quiet charm. She stared out the window, the lilac pressed against her palm like a talisman. "Help each other out," Nathan's email had said, but now the words felt like a riddle, their meaning obscured by his absence. Was this neglect, or something worse? The memory of selling her home flooded back, sharp and vivid. Susan Caldwell, the realtor, had sat across from Eleanor in the colonial's kitchen, her pen tapping against a clipboard. "This house is a gem, Mrs. Harper," she'd said, her eyes lingering on the lilac bush outside. "Henry's legacy, isn't it? Are you sure you want to let it go?" Eleanor's fingers had traced the heart-shaped scar on the table, another of Henry's carvings. She'd thought of Nathan's email, the hope it dangled like a lure. "Henry's gone," she'd replied, her voice steady. "I'm choosing the living." Susan had frowned but nodded, listing the house that afternoon. Eleanor had walked to the lilac bush afterward, the air sweet with May's promise. She'd clipped a single bloom, whispering, "You're coming with me," as if the flower could carry Henry's love across the miles. Now, in the cab, That choice felt reckless, the lilac a fragile anchor in a storm she hadn't foreseen. The rental house on Pine Street was a modern box, its beige siding bland against Burlington's vibrant maples. Eleanor paid the driver, her arthritis flaring as she dragged her suitcase up the steps. The keypad blinked red, indifferent. She punched in 4729, the door clicking open with a hollow sound. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and baby shampoo, the living room cluttered with Liam's toys and unwashed dishes. Claire stood by the kitchen counter, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her suit crisp despite the late hour. "Eleanor," she said, her smile polite but thin, like frost on a window. "Was the flight okay? Come in. Liam's finishing his tablet time. He'll say hi soon." Before Eleanor could respond, Claire turned away, her heels clicking as she disappeared into the hall. Eleanor stood frozen, the lilac's napkin damp against her skin. She'd expected warmth, a welcome, not this calculated courtesy. She was a guest, not family, a stranger in her son's home. Claire's voice echoed from the kitchen, sharp and distracted. "Your room's downstairs, follow the hall." Eleanor nodded, though no one saw, and shuffled toward the door Claire had indicated. The staircase was steep, the air growing cooler, mustier with each step. The basement room was a crypt, its concrete walls stained with moisture, a narrow twin bed shoved against a peeling desk, a single half-denon let in a sliver of gray light, the glass coated with dust. Eleanor's suitcase thumped against the floor, the sound swallowed by the damp silence. This was her place now, a tomb for the mother she'd been, buried beneath Nathan's indifference. She sat on the bed, the mattress creaking under her weight. The lilac bloom trembled in her hand, its petals curling inward as if shielding itself from the cold. She found a cracked glass on the desk, filled it with water from a rusty tap, and placed the lilac inside. "We're still here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The flower stood defiant, a heartbeat of color in the gray, but Eleanor felt its fragility mirrored in her own chest. She'd left Willow Creek for this, sold Henry's heart-carved swing, the lilacs they'd nurtured, for a basement that smelled of neglect. The memory of Susan's questions stung. "Are you sure you want to let it go?" Eleanor had been sure, circling back to the lilac bloom in her hand. Eleanor's resolve wavered. Had she traded one loneliness for another? The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and small footsteps pattered down. Liam appeared, his hoodie emblazoned with the superhero logo, his eyes narrowing as he spotted her. He was taller now, his freckles faded, his expression guarded. "Grandma Ellie," he said, his voice uncertain, then blunt. "When are you leaving?" The question hit like a slap, its innocence laced with dismissal. Eleanor blinked, her throat tightening. I'm not sure, Liam," she managed, forcing a smile. "I'm here to spend time with you." He scrunched his nose, unimpressed. "Dad said you're just visiting. You'll go back to your house soon, right?" Before she could answer, Claire's voice cut through from upstairs. "Liam, don't be rude. Come eat." He muttered something and bolted back up, his sneakers thumping like a fading drumbeat. Eleanor stood at the foot of the stairs, Liam's words echoing. "When are you leaving?" He didn't know her, didn't want her here. She was a visitor, a temporary fixture like a coat left on a chair. The basement's chill seeped into her bones, her arthritis sparking in her ankle, an old wound flaring in the damp. She sank back onto the bed, the lilac's shadow flickering on the wall, a ghost of her past life. She'd come to Burlington to rebuild, to be Grandma Ellie again. But Nathan's absence, Claire's frost, Liam's detachment, they were walls, not bridges. Her hope, fragile as the lilac's petals, was wilting in this sunless place. Upstairs, the house was alive with sounds, dishes clattering, Liam's tablet blaring, Claire's muffled phone call. Eleanor climbed the stairs, her knees creaking like the Willow Creek floorboards she'd left behind. The living room was a mess of toys and takeout containers, the air thick with the scent of greasy pizza. Nathan still wasn't home, his meeting stretching into the night. Eleanor hovered by the kitchen, catching fragments of Claire's conversation. If she's got the money, we need to know. The landlord's pushing to sell. The words were sharp, calculated, like shards of glass. Eleanor froze, her breath catching. Money? Selling? Was this why Nathan had invited her? Not for family, but for her savings, her house's sale? The lilac in the basement seemed to pulse in her mind, its bloom a warning, not a comfort. She retreated downstairs, her heart pounding. The basement was darker now, the halfway black with night. She sat by the desk, the lilac's glass catching a faint reflection of her face. Lined, tired, but not broken. She thought of Henry, his hands in the soil, his voice promising forever. She'd sold that forever for Nathan's vague plea, but now doubt gnawed at her. Claire's words, Liam's question, Nathan's absence. They were pieces of a puzzle she didn't want to solve. Had Nathan lured her here to mine her worth, to turn her grief into a down payment? The thought was a blade cutting through her hope. Outside, a storm was brewing, the wind howling like a chorus of ghosts. Eleanor stared at the lilac, its petals curling tighter, as if bracing for the cold. "We're still here," she whispered again, but the words felt hollow. She'd come to Burlington to be needed, to be loved, but this house was no home. It was a ledger, and she was an entry to be balanced. Yet something in her stirred, a spark of the woman who'd planted lilacs, who'd raised Nathan alone, who'd faced Henry's death with quiet strength. She wasn't a guest, a bank account, or a ghost. She was Eleanor Harper, and she'd find her place, even in this darkness. The storm broke, rain hammering the roof, thunder rattling the basement's walls. Eleanor stood, her shadow merging with the lilacs. She wouldn't run, not yet. She'd watch, listen, learn what Nathan and Claire hid behind their careful words. The lilac was her witness, its bloom a vow. She'd fight for Liam, for herself, for the family she still believed in, even if they didn't believe in her. The night stretched on, the storm a mirror to her resolve, wild, unyielding, and ready to reshape the world. The basement room was a crypt, its damp air clinging to Eleanor Harper's skin like a second grief. She sat at the rickety desk, the lilac bloom in its cracked glass, a fading pulse of Willow Creek's warmth. Upstairs, Nathan's Burlington rental hummed with life, Liam's tablet blaring, Claire's heels clicking. But down here, Eleanor was a shadow, an outsider in her son's world. The half-grand leaked gray light, Burlington's urban sprawl, a stark contrast to the maple-lined streets she'd left behind. 3 days in this house, and she was already a footnote, her hope wilting like the lilac's curling petals. Eleanor clutched a quilt square she'd brought from home, its stitches a map of her and Henry's life, each thread a memory of laughter, loss, love. She'd hoped to share it with Liam, to teach him the stories woven into its fabric, but his indifference stung sharper than the basement's chill. Yesterday she'd found him sprawled on the living room couch, his superhero hoodie bunched up, his eyes glued to a math worksheet. "Need help, Liam?" she'd asked, her voice soft, eager. He'd shrugged, barely glancing up. "It's just fractions." "I'm fine." But his pencil lay idle, his brow furrowed. Eleanor had knelt beside him, pointing to a problem. "Try breaking it into smaller parts, like cutting a maple scone." He'd rolled his eyes. "That's dumb, Grandma Ellie. I don't need you to baby me." Before Eleanor could respond, Claire had swept in, her tailored suit pristine despite the morning's chaos. "Eleanor, we're trying to teach Liam independence," she'd said, her smile tight, like a door half closed. "Helping too much, it doesn't help." The words were polite but barbed, slicing through Eleanor's nurturing instinct. She'd nodded, retreating to the basement, her quilt square crumpled in her fist. Claire's criticism wasn't just about homework. It was a verdict. Eleanor's love, her care, was unvalued, a relic in this house of sharp edges and sharper ambitions. Now, as rain tapped the basement window, Eleanor smoothed the quilt square, its colors muted in the dim light. She'd come to Burlington to be needed, to stitch herself back into Nathan and Liam's lives, but they saw her as a loose thread, easily snipped. The memory of Willow Creek's lilac bush haunted her, its vibrant blooms a promise she'd carried here, only to find a ledger where love should have been. Upstairs, the front door slammed, Nathan's voice cutting through the house's hum. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Maybe he'd seek her out, apologize for the airport, offer the hug she'd craved. But his footsteps faded, and the basement grew colder. Dinner was a silent affair, the dining table cluttered with pizza boxes and Liam's tablet. Nathan, still in his wrinkled work shirt, barely looked at Eleanor as he slid a slice onto her plate. Claire scrolled her phone, her fork poised like a conductor's baton. Liam poked at his crust, his eyes distant. Eleanor cleared her throat, grasping for connection. "Liam, did you finish that math?" He sighed, loud and theatrical. "Yeah, whatever." Nathan glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Mom, let's not push him. School's tough enough." The rebuke was soft but final, another wall between her and her family. As Elena cleared the dishes, no one offered to help. Nathan leaned back, his fingers tapping the table. "Mom, we've been talking," he said, his tone casual, like discussing the weather. "This house, the rent, it's a lot. Utilities, Liam's school fees, it's tight. If you're staying, maybe you could chip in a bit." The words landed like a stone, heavy and cold. Elena froze, a plate dripping in her hands. Chip in, not stay with us, not be part of our family, but pay. She was a tenant, a line item in their budget. I'll think about it," she managed, her voice a whisper. Nathan nodded, satisfied, and turned to Claire, who gave a curt smile. Back in the basement, Eleanor's arthritis flared, a dull ache mirroring the pain in her chest. The lilac bloom stared back, its petals browning, a heart losing its rhythm. Nathan's request wasn't just about money, it was a revelation. She wasn't his mother here. She was a resource, a means to an end. The quilt square lay on the bed, its stitches unraveling like her trust. She'd sold her home, Henry's legacy, for this, a house where love was tallied in dollars, not embraces. The storm outside grew fiercer, thunder rattling the walls, a mirror to the storm within her. Late that night, unable to sleep, Eleanor crept upstairs for water. The living room was dark, but voices drifted from the kitchen. Nathan and Claire, their tones low, urgent. Eleanor paused, her bare feet cold on the hardwood. "Her savings from the house sale," Nathan was saying, his voice clipped. "If we play it right, we can secure the down payment. The landlord's ready to sell, but we need her to commit." Claire's reply was softer, calculating. "Just keep her comfortable. She's already halfway there." Eleanor's breath caught, her hand gripping the counter. Her savings, her home's sale. This was why Nathan had invited her, not for Liam, not for family, but for a transaction. Her life reduced to a deposit slip. The lilac's image flashed in her mind, its bloom a warning she'd ignored. She backed away, silent as a ghost, and retreated to the basement. The room was a grave now, burying the mother she'd been. But Eleanor wasn't ready to be buried. She sat at the desk, her phone glowing as she searched for a realtor. Susan Caldwell's name appeared, the same agent who'd sold her Willow Creek home. Eleanor dialed, her voice steady despite the hour. "Susan, it's Eleanor Harper. I want to buy a property. The rental on Pine Street, Burlington. Cash offer. Can you make it quick?" Susan's surprise was audible. "That's fast, Eleanor. The owners are motivated, but there's another interested party. Cash could seal it. Are you sure?" Eleanor glanced at the lilac, its shadow a defiant spark. "I'm sure," she said. "I'm done being a guest in my own life." They arranged a remote walkthrough, and Eleanor hung up, her heart pounding. Buying the house wasn't revenge, it was reclamation, a stake in her own future. The storm outside roared, but Eleanor felt a quiet strength, like the maples standing firm against the wind. The next morning, the realtor confirmed the purchase. Eleanor stood in the living room, the lilac in a jar she'd brought upstairs, its scent faint but stubborn. Nathan and Claire were in the kitchen, oblivious, sipping coffee. Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice calm but unyielding. "I need to tell you something," she said. They looked up, Nathan's brow furrowing, Claire's eyes narrowing. I bought this house, cash, it's mine now. The room stilled, the air thick with shock. Nathan's coffee mug clattered to the counter. Mom, what? When? Claire's face paled, her phone slipping from her hand. I heard you last night, Eleanor continued, her gaze steady. You invited me here to feel out my savings, to fund your down payment. You didn't want me, you wanted my money. Nathan opened his mouth, but no words came. Claire stammered, Eleanor, you misunderstood. Eleanor raised a hand, silencing her. I don't owe you a cent. I came for family, but you made me a ledger. This house is mine, and you have 1 month to find a new place. She turned the lilac jar in her hands and walked out, leaving their stunned silence behind. Maggie Sullivan's cottage in Shelburne, a half-hour from Burlington, was a balm after the rental's cold. Its cedar shingles glowed under Vermont's autumn sun, poppies nodding by the porch. Maggie, Eleanor's sister, opened the door with a hug that needed no words. You're home, Ellie, she said, her Irish lilt warm as the kitchen's maple syrup scent. Eleanor set the lilac jar on the windowsill, its petals dry but holding shape, like her own battered heart. The cottage was alive. Photos of Maggie's grandkids, a basket of quilt scraps, the hum of a radio playing folk tunes. Here, Eleanor wasn't an outsider. That week, Maggie dragged her to Shelburne's craft co-op, a barn-turned-studio where locals wove quilts and swapped stories. Eleanor hesitated, her quilt square tucked in her bag, but the co-op's leader, a wiry woman named Ruth, nudged her forward. Show us what you've got, Ruth said, her eyes kind. Eleanor shared her square, its stitches telling of Willow Creek, Henry, loss. The women listened, their needles still, and Ruth grinned. You're teaching next week. We need that heart. Eleanor blushed but nodded, a spark igniting in her chest. She began teaching quilt making, her classes growing from a handful to a crowd, each stitch a step toward self-love. One evening, as she tidied the barn, she wrote on a sticky note, Eleanor's home, welcome. She pressed it to the cottage's door, a quiet vow to herself. The lilac jar sat by her bed, its bloom a relic of pain and promise. Willow Creek felt distant now, its lilacs a memory, but Maggie's cottage was present, alive, her. As she sipped tea by the cottage's hearth, a letter arrived, slipped under the door. No return address, just her name and a child's scrawl. Inside was a drawing, a stick figure Liam planting flowers labeled, To Grandma Ellie. Sorry. Eleanor's breath caught. Was this regret, a crack in Liam's indifference, or another plea orchestrated by Nathan? The lilac's shadow danced on the wall, silent, leaving the answer to her. Outside, Vermont's maples glowed red, their leaves falling like unanswered questions. Eleanor folded the drawing, her heart torn between hope and caution, the future a quilt yet to be stitched.